Welcome to the Action Lab Leadership Podcast, the show where we have honest, unfiltered conversations with business leaders. I am Danny, the founder of Action Lab Leadership, and today we are joined by Sara Paz, the Chief Marketing Officer at Embed. Sara, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. And also, congratulations, Danny. I'm so excited for you. This is a whole new chapter, in your, in the things that you do. So bravo. I'm excited for you. I'm
It's
proud
a
of you.
new chapter. Thank you. It's a new chapter and one that I very much enjoy. Having deep conversations with people is one of my favorite things in the world. And the fact that we get to record this conversation and send it out on the podcast is fantastic. So I want to start with the word leadership. It's a word that
Mhm.
means a lot of things to a lot of different people. How do you define leadership and what does it mean to you to be a leader?
Well, I think that leadership and being in a leadership role, whatever that may look like in whatever organization it might be, both personally and professionally, it's really tough, right? It's really, really tough. And I think that it's important um, to learn on the journey, on your professional, personal journey of what it means to actually be a leader. And it's very individualistic. Okay. In my world, for me, being a leader is fundamentally bringing out the very, very best in people that I lead. Okay. And I think that just in my career, at least in the last 15 years, I've been really lucky. I always say, I'm really, really lucky because I've had these incredible high performing teams. And what's amazing is that, you know, 30% at all these teams, about 30% of them had worked for me at different companies, right? And then would join and be like, oh, you're from HTC, you're from Intel. Yeah, I heard about you. And now we're on this team on Embed. And all of them know, hey, it's a professional adventure. A professional adventure means, hey, we are going to be doing the best possible work that we possibly can, right? And we're going to literally be stretching ourselves intellectually, stretching ourselves professionally to just do like work that we can look at and say, wow, I'm super, super proud of that. And not only did I grow in terms of skill set, but I also grew in terms of, my emotional intelligence, my own professional skills. And so being a leader for me not only means leading this incredibly, high performing teams that I've been, again, I feel so blessed, right? Because honestly, I look at each one of them and I'm like, you're way smarter than I am in this one area. Leadership for me is hiring people who are way better than I am and have a domain expertise in their specific area and saying, listen, working for me is going to mean that you're going to get to do the best work of your life. Zero politics, zero. Right. And so, and when I'm interviewing candidates, I also tell them, listen, if you're looking for a place to float, right, this would not be it because there's like nowhere to hide on my teams. Everybody knows, it's a professional adventure. And when I've called previous employees and said, hey, I got a professional adventure for you. Are you ready for it? They're like, no, 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 Sarah, you know what? No, they might be a different phase in their life and they'll just be like, nope. I've got like three small children at home. I can't call me later. Right. And sure enough, later they'll come and they will join. And for me, leadership is being able to look at these employees, these professionals that are doing life with me. Because, and we were talking about it this morning, in many cases, we talk to one another so much more than they even speak to their extended family. Right. So, in essence, we are doing life together. And because we're doing life together, the very least that I can do as a leader is I'm removing obstacles. Right. And politics is the source of obstacles. I'm removing obstacles so that people can ascend and do work that they look at and say, wow, Sarah, working for you, I reached corners of my mind that I didn't know, I could. And it's always makes me really proud.
You said bring out the best in other people. And I think
Mhm.
part of that assumes that you see things in them that they maybe don't see in themselves yet. You see another level of growth. You see them being able to push their skills and push their own boundaries. How do you bridge that gap when you see a future that in another person that they don't quite see yet? How do you bridge the gap from what you see to get them on board? Because I would imagine
Mhm.
sometimes you get pushback of like, no, I can't do anymore. No, this is all I'm capable of. Or no, this is my skill set. Whatever that case may be, how do you get them beyond that to the other side?
Well, one, I'll give you a really good example. There's various approaches, right? But for me, fundamentally, one of my values is about trust, right? You're never going to be an innovator or take risks if you do not have a trust in your leader that your leader's going to have your back and support you every step of the way. And that when you fail, there isn't going to be a conversation about assigning blame. There'll be an analysis of what happened, but it's all about failing forward and moving on, and always, always celebrating that we endeavored valiantly to try something we hadn't done before. And you know what? It failed. And my problem most of the time is that we're not failing enough. Okay. I'm like, we're playing it too safe. We're not failing enough. But I think in one particular example, we had this really just beautiful, like brilliant human being professional that joined Embed. And she joined us from Samsung. And literally, when she joined us, it was the pandemic. And she said, listen, I've got two aging parents that I need to take care of. I can only do 4 days a week. I need balance. She came in one role. Okay. When everything was settled and sorted there, okay, and she went through a massive life quake, right? Losing your parents, massive life quake. Okay. She came out of it and said, okay, I'm ready for a professional adventure. Let's have a discussion about what that is. And it ended up being not a marketing role, but rather a business ownership role, meaning she was going to take a line of revenue, a business line, and say, I'm going to own it. And the way to get her to cross that threshold, because it is quite a leap, is simply by saying, listen, I believe in you. We believe in you. We're going to support you on your journey as you ramp up into this role. And by the way, there's a safety net. So if you decide at some point, oh, you know what, this gig was not for me, I don't want to do this, you have the safety net of a leader who's going to say to you, no worries and congratulations for valiantly trying that, right? Because there were so many learnings when you try something new, regardless of whether you say this is for me or not for me, there will be that gift in that. And I think that safety net enables people to say, hey, I'm going to figure it out as I go. And then when they're able to report out and say, wow, can you believe it? I sealed this one deal that generated $1 million worth of pure profit for our company. And it's something our company had never done, while at the same time driving innovation and operational efficiency. I mean, she was successful every measurement, and not at any point did she become the worst version of herself or get too stressed or just so, I mean, for me, that's one of the mechanisms, if you will, leadership approaches that I take, which is just literally saying to people, I'm with you. Like, I got you. Let's endeavor. Let's try this and let's see how it goes.
It sounds like the safety net gives people permission to fail. And what
Yes.
I see happen a lot with leaders or business owners is they look at their team and they say, hey, we've got to get comfortable with failure. We've got to get comfortable making mistakes, pushing the envelope. And when it's other people making a mistake, they're very encouraging and supportive. But when they themselves make their own mistakes, they're very harsh on themselves and very critical. What is your relationship with failure when it's you and not your team?
I have to tell you something. I fail all the time, not enough, which says to me I'm playing it a little bit too safe. There's certain types of failures that I can stomach and learn from it, right? So nothing is wasted, okay? And feel okay about it. But I think, as you know, Danny, because you work with so many overachievers in our industry and throughout, um, you know that we can be particularly tough on ourselves during certain types of failures. And it doesn't even have to be a failure per se. It could be a life quake, right? When something unexpected happens, or when we're at the center of something that goes wrong. Um, it's fascinating because it's during those moments of friction that one has to dig really deep and ask the question, what is the gift in this moment? right? And how can I be of value? Like, how can I be my best self? And on too many occasions, and I'll tell you right now, Danny, because we've discussed this so many times, the wheels have come off the car. At some point, something has, like something's got to give kind of thing. And where I'll just say, hey, I look at something and think, during that life quake, when I was in the messy middle, perhaps I wasn't the best version of myself. And perhaps that wasn't fair to my teams or even my colleagues because they had to endure that. Right. Well, think about it. If I'm high energy on a great day, it's a knife that cuts both ways. If I'm having a bad day, that energy is enough to actually be crushing versus inspiring. And so, as we've discussed so many times, for me, it's just like I have to turn down the volume on the negative, right? Soften that so that I can, continue to grow into my own best self. All of us are on a journey, right? Whether we're a leader or we're not a leader, everybody's on a journey. Everybody has development areas. If you're not dead, you're not done yet.
These things that you're discovering come from a sense of self-awareness. And you, through our conversations, we've had many, many, many over the past, 7 or 8 months. And you're a very self-aware person. And through that, there's a lot of self-discovery that happens with you or anybody watching or listening to this podcast. What is
Mhm.
something that you've discovered about yourself recently? And take recently, however long of a time frame you want that to be.
Yes. I realized what I've discovered about myself is that the journey that I'm on is the right journey, right? And my purpose and my purpose for my life has become crystallized. Of course, in working with you, Danny, and also with working with other leaders, incredible thinkers like Beth Stanley in the industry, I've realized that my purpose is clear, right? I believe that every single individual um, in this world, and they come into the world with a note, a special note that only they can sing. In other words, a special gift, right? It doesn't determine what they do, it determines how they do it. And the whole purpose of life is just figuring out what that is if we accept the calling, right? If we follow our curiosity and endeavor to do things that maybe we didn't think we could do, or maybe our socioeconomic background would determine that, nope, that's not the cycle of life that you're supposed to be following or that's meant for you. And for me, that's my purpose, is honoring that calling so that I can continue evolving into the best version of myself and hopefully inspiring others to do the same, whether they're my family, they're my friends, they're my employees. And that is something, it's wonderful, okay, to basically have the discovery that, hey, you know, I'm on the right path. This is definitely my purpose. I'm not going to question that. What's wonderful though is that you and I had a conversation, and we have to share this because it's just too much of a nugget. Every time I share it with people, they're like, I'm writing this down. Hold on, Sarah. And that is when I said to you, hey, I just want to continue evolving into the best version of myself.
Mhm.
Right. And you said, you're striving for greatness. I was like, no, 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 no. We don't want to use that word because I don't want people to think, that I'm, full of myself. And you were like, no, Sarah. And I love how you shared with me that greatness is inclusive and it's not comparative or competitive. Whereas the greatest is exclusive, it's competitive, and it excludes others from coming along in the journey. And so at the top of my list, as you know, is greatness. And I walk around with it and just say, hey, greatness, right? We're striving for greatness.
I
That was a
like
big discovery.
I like
Thank
what
you.
you said there about the note. It doesn't affect what people do, it affects how they do it. And I think that that's a beautiful observation because very often people can get stuck in this mindset of what is my purpose? What is my
Right.
purpose? And there's
Yes.
so much the baggage they hold with that question is what is the thing I'm supposed to do? And maybe it's not the thing you're supposed to do, it's how you bring your skills to bear on the things that you do. And it reminds me of two things. Number one, Simon Sinek's start with why. Your why is not the thing that you do, but it's the underlying thread and your North Star through everything in your life. But it
Right.
also reminds me of something that I heard on, I think this was an episode of a Mike Rowe podcast. But
Hmm.
he was talking to somebody about the idea of passion, and the line that he shared was, "Don't follow your passion, but bring it with you wherever you go."
Oh,
And I
that's
love that. And
beautiful.
I think it goes hand in hand with what you were just saying about how our note and our personality, our characteristics, our skill sets, the things that have informed how we've become who we are as human beings impacts the way that we show up each day, day in, day out, and how we can take our unique skills to tackle any problem.
Absolutely. And in fact, if we take it let's take it up another notch, right? When you look at certain personalities, whether it's celebrities or individuals that would be universally recognized, like Oprah is a good example. Um, I think as well as Obama, former President Obama would be a good example. You name it, whomever that might be in your life, professional athletes, actors, whatever. What's fascinating is how the general public will look at these individuals and say, they're just bigger than life, right? Well, life is pretty big, right? And the reality is this, is that they found out what their gift was, okay? And ultimately, our job is to discover what our gift is and become more of ourselves, right? Of who we're meant to be, innately, just as they discovered what their special gift was and they put it at the service of self. Right. And so I think it's fascinating when, you have these discussions with people and they're like, oh, I failed here and they think it's the end of the world. No, it's not. In fact, let's celebrate that failure. Maybe you discover that that wasn't the job for you. In my case, I'll give you a really good example. In 2023, we were strategizing, right? Because strategy is one of my jams. I love strategy, right? Vision work, etc. And I've always thought I'm a creative professional, right? It's not what I do, it's who I am and how I live. But in this strategy session, Renee, our CEO, basically took the strategy. I said, look, this is what I would do, right? And she said, well, why don't you lead this team? And it was a brand new team. We recruited the team and we just did a lot of things around customer success and our SaaS products and whatnot. And it involved sales. Right. And I thought to myself, that's not my wheelhouse. It was a big risk. And Renee did the same thing for me in terms of a gift. She said, you got a safety net. Try it. No hard feelings. You don't like it. You don't want it. No problem. And I have to tell you, once I like, once I got my jam going, do you know what I mean? Once I got in the zone, okay, I I'm telling you, I absolutely loved it. And I applied the same principles that I had applied to marketing, which is finding ordinary solutions to extraordinary problems, right? Developing a plan, planning your work around the plan. And it flowed and I grew so much from it. It was incredible. And it led obviously to the move to Dallas and whatnot. And the rest is history.
I want to come back to the safety net in just a moment, but first,
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said about using the Oprah as an example, or the celebrity, or some figure that you said a lot of people will look at them and say, well, they're larger than life. And an observation that struck me about that is sometimes with people, when they say that person's larger than life, they're almost separating the other person from themselves, as they have something magic that I don't. They have some special secret sauce that I don't. And that's not actually true. Luck plays a role in everybody in life, but I think it's important to recognize that every human has the same 24 hours in a day. Every human has the ability to grow into these skills and be able to not just grow in the skills, but have the habits and disciplines and routines to use them in meaningful and strategic ways. And I think sometimes what can happen in an unhelpful and unproductive way is people can look at
Mhm.
that maybe role model, but not view it as a hey, I want to strive to be like them in some of their habits and disciplines, but more like, well, they must have something that I don't, and I'm missing something.
When in fact, and adding to what you just said, because such an astute observation, I've heard that before, where people are like, well, they got a secret sauce, like you said, right? Or they have to. Actually, all of us have something that is a gift of ours, right? We just need to discover what that is and put it in service of self, right? And I'm talking about equanimity, right? I'm not talking about, the superior complex or inferiority complex. Actually, the ego serves two polarizing dimensions, right? Self-castigation and self-congratulation. At the end of the day, we just need to put the ego in service of self, right? Because these two extremes will not serve you well, right? And so once you tame that and you achieve this level of equanimity where you're able to say, hey, this is who I am, right? I know the good, I know the bad, I know the ugly, but it doesn't matter because I am growing, right? I'm growing into the fullest version of myself, whatever that may be. And at the end of the day, as we said, it's about how you do things and how others react to what you're doing when you're doing it and what it brings out in them. That is a special gift. It's not what you do. So I have discovered, I've also experienced that where people are like, no, I only do event planning. Or, hey, no, I only do this. And I'm always like, hey, why don't you just change it? If you're curious about it, just try it. I mean, there's nothing that you're going to lose, and you're going to learn so much. So do it, right? Just try and find that magic within you. And I also go back to the habits and hacks that you just talked about, because you and I, as life learners, okay, we right away, when we encounter someone who's not a life learner, we know who they are. They're set in their ways, right? They change by not changing at all. That was the Eddie Vedder Pearl Jam song, right? It just and so what's fascinating is, I'll give you a really good example. So you and I, sorry, are very much into hacks and habits and whatnot of high performing individuals and applying them and whatnot to, obviously, um, I think what were we saying the other day about squeezing life dry and milking it to the bone, right? Because that's what we want to do, right? We came here, we have one life, let's make the most of it. And life is ultimately what we make it. And so I'll give you an example of endeavoring and stepping outside my comfort zone. You'll see I'm surrounded by plants. This is what used to be in my patio. We've had conversations about this. After what, 40 years of being an American expat, living around the globe in, condos in which you really you just couldn't have plants, right? You didn't have a yard, if you will. You didn't really have like a an area in which you could cultivate this type of passion. And yet, I've moved to Dallas, and I love it's my sanctuary, right? My garden, my flower beds. Listen, it's a humble little space, but it doesn't matter because I go out there and I'm hugging trees and bushes and I'm talking to my plants. Rico Suave is here in the corner, so I've given them names, right? And so I brought them into the office because it's the sunniest spot in my life, and I'm watching them thrive. They will survive the winter because these are tropical hibiscuses. And then I'll just put them back in my garden come the spring. Again, it wasn't something that I knew that I was going to thrive at. I didn't know if I was going to be any good at it. I did, and a lot of trial and error. Like I planted a whole bunch of stuff that would have thrived in California. It didn't thrive in the Dallas, summer. So what I educated myself on what worked and what didn't. And you know what? At the end of the day, it brings me so much happiness and satisfaction that it was a worthy endeavor, right? Even when I failed, it was a worthy endeavor. And so I think that is applicable to all things in life. Is just check it out. You have nothing to lose, right?
I'm in the same boat as you of naming plants here in the corner. Well, I have a snake plant that my wife and I named Severus Snape from Harry Potter. Very snake like. I want to bring this back around to the idea of the
Yes.
safety net. You described
Yep.
the ways in which you provide a safety net for your team members. You just described a way in which Renee provided a safety net to you when you tried something new. How
Mhm.
do you provide a safety net to yourself?
Oh, that's such a great question. You always challenge me, Danny. You're always challenging me. Just like at Thanksgiving when you were like, of all the things you're grateful for, you need to write a gratitude letter to yourself. What an amazing discovery. I wrote that down and I'm like, you know what? I do. Like I should, like every individual should write, gratitude notes to themselves and give themselves a safety net. The reality is this, this, and I know this, is that when you have individuals, whether they're high performing or they're not high performing, they tend to speak to themselves pretty harshly. And I think you and I joke that like if kicking our own bum was an Olympic sport, I would probably medal, right? Because I can be very hard with myself and very demanding with myself. Just as I am also with my teams where I'm really demanding. We have really high standards. Um, but I think that it's something I have to remind myself about all the time is, hey, you know what? Maybe I should give myself a safety net as well, right? And let that be that. right? Let it, you know, it's while I could say endeavoring valiantly, has so many learnings. And if you really, I mean, if you're not wasting your life, you'll learn from failures, right? And see the gift that's in it and use it for yourself in your own growth. I think sometimes even little things, sometimes little things, there is no safety net, right? Like I spill something and I'm like, come on, Sarah Paz. Right? Nobody, like, hello, nothing's lost. We're not carrying kidneys and coolers, as Brittany Betty would say. And so in those moments, really a light-hearted approach would probably serve me better. Thanks for that reminder.
Something I find fascinating is that you mentioned high achievers and yourself included can talk critically to yourself, and your own self-talk can be harsh at times. What I've also found is very often when people say my self-talk, it's more like my self-listening, because they're not actively taking the wheel. They're just letting the kind of default mode of negativity of the brain talk at them, and they're just listening to themselves. And I have found that when I hijack that and I actually talk to myself, and sometimes I have to start that process by saying the words out loud, that I can take over and have a much more productive conversation with myself about myself rather than just listening to the negative part of my brain scream at me.
Right. Right. And I think it's something that you shared with me previously was, how would you speak to your 7-year-old self? Right. And anyone who's ever seen me with my dogs and my plants, right, knows that I'm very like soft-hearted, right? Like I love deeply, right? And like I'm all in, if I'm your friend, like I'm all in, right? I don't do anything in halves, and I take great pride in that. And so anyone who's seen me with my dogs, on all fours where I'm on my knees and whatnot, knows that even when I'm speaking to them, even when I'm, course correcting a certain behavior, what have you, I am extremely patient. And I'm able to speak to them in a very soft, kind voice. And I think to myself, if my 7-year-old self was in front of me, I would do the same. And it's important to remind ourselves, here's the challenge we have, Danny, okay, is when we're life learners like we are, and we know all the hacks and we know all the great habits. It's keeping those on track, and remembering in the moment, hey, this is the habit that I'm trying to hone, and that is hijacking that self-talk, so that and controlling the narrative, because it's fat. You know what's fascinating? The exercise that you and I did, and I thank you for this. I loved it. Okay, because you asked me what discoveries. There's so many discoveries, Danny. And working with you and talking with you when we did the end of year, right, where you're scrolling through your phone and looking at pictures, what I realized is I had this narrative throughout 2025 where I felt like, oh, I don't have balance. I don't have balance. I haven't seen my friends. I haven't taken any trips. Hey, I saw my friends a record number of times, and I took a record number of trips. So I really needed to control, I need to control that storyline, because it was a misconceived notion.
You checked the stats, and the stats told you the truth.
That's right.
One of the things that when you and I talk, and I've felt this from you for a long time, you have
Mm,
a very high sense of self-confidence. And that's some people struggle with confidence. And I
mhm,
tend to not like the word just confidence in itself, because there's multiple kinds. There's skill confidence, there's situational confidence, there's self-confidence, there's several different types. But
mhm.
when you think about your journey as a leader to get to where you are now and where you're going in the future, how have you built your own sense of self-confidence? What are the methods that you've used or the things that you've done in order to know exactly who you are with such firm clarity?
That's an exceptional question. I'm so happy that you asked it. Okay. Because I think that individuals will often look at a person and who they perceive as confident and conflate confidence with certainty, when the reality is that the universal truth is that there is no certainty. Even individuals who might appear to be certain are not certain, because nobody knows for certainty what's going to happen in life, what's going to happen with the economy, what's going to happen with anything. And so I think if I take a step back, I am confident in my uncertainty. Okay. I am confident in the fact that whatever happens, I will be able to navigate it. I've done it before, I'll do it again. Right. And some of the mantras that I have are just very simple, right? Very pedestrian, meaning that I can tell myself, hey, I'm stronger than I know. Right. I'm stronger than I know. I've been through worse. I can get through anything. And hey, I'm going to give myself some credit for how I'm showing up in the world. Right. And if everything just kind of blows up, if you will, I know that I'll be able to find a way. And so getting to that level was a journey of, um, strength finders, coaching, psychographics, discovering, testing and learning, discovering what I like, discovering what I don't like. And a lot of it, and listen, when people, I think one time someone said to me, Sarah, I just wish I had your time. I'm like, wait a minute, hold up. Okay. Your energy will flow where the attention goes. It's as simple as that. And at any given moment, when you are speaking with someone, that is a learning opportunity because you're able to observe people and say, I want to be like that. And you can also observe other individuals and be like, I never want to be like that. Right. And it's a learning for you without projecting any judgment on those individuals. It is a learning at being self-aware and present in a moment where you're able to say, hey, everything and every interaction, right? I'm learning something and I'm evolving and I'm becoming more of who I am meant to be. Even if that means, hey, I used to like to go to raves. I don't like to go to raves anymore. It's all evolution, right? It's all growth and growth and learning. And again, I always go back to if you're not dead, you're not done yet. And what does that mean? That means that there's such a stigma around aging, right? And you'll see it a lot in ageism, if you will. The notion that as you age, you run out of fresh ideas, right? Or you're less creative. And yes, there is a downfall to aging. It usually is associated with health. But what I tell people is, hey, if you don't make time for wellness and health and fitness, you're going to be forced to make time for illness. Right. It's as simple as that. I look at my parents, my dad's in his 80s and he's the strongest person I know. Right. And so for me, it's all lifestyle that moves you and propels you forward. And I always tell people, listen, we need to celebrate aging because I'm going to be 55 this year. And I'm telling you right now, I've never been stronger, smarter, healthier, more creative, if you will, in the wisdom, there's no shortcut to wisdom, right? You need to live in order to become wise. And so I think, you know what, there's such an equanimity to people in their 50s and their 60s and beyond, because these are, you have enough life experiences to be able to say, listen, I have buried dreams and loved ones, right? And I have accepted, a life that I hadn't planned for, but this is the journey that I'm on. And in many cases, I think you and I talked about one of my favorite quotes from Dion Vreeland, which was, the best life is defined by the individual. Okay. Success is defined by each individual. The best life for you is the one that you define for yourself and you work to make it happen, right? That is the best life. And so I've tried to kind of follow those ethos, those mantras and what have you to get to where I am now. And lucky for me, I have people like you, Danny, people like Beth Stanley in my life that are, coaches and mentors and open your eyes to notions and ideas and concepts. It's awesome.
You said wisdom. You must live. What was it? You must live to be wise. I want to take
To
that one
become
step.
wise.
I want to take that one step further.
Yes.
Wisdom doesn't happen automatically. We have to extract wisdom from life. You probably know a lot of people who have a lot of life experience and have zero wisdom from it. They make the same mistakes again and again. They haven't grown as a person, whatever that might be.
Yes.
But we have to
Yes.
extract wisdom from our life and then apply it. What are the ways that you
That's
extract wisdom from
brilliant.
your own life?
That's absolutely brilliant. And Danny, you're 100% correct. No amount of living will result in wisdom unless you are alert, aware, and searching for the gifts. If you view it through the lens of a gift, even the most painful experiences ultimately is a gift. And it teaches you something about yourself and about the world. And it's incredibly powerful. But it takes a level of a courageousness and curiosity to be able to look at it and be like, okay, what was my side of the street? What am I responsible for? And what's that learning there? What's serving me? What's not serving me? How do I invest in what's working and divest what's not working? And that was also part of the end of the year exercise that we did, where we said, hey, what are we grateful for? Where do we find joy? Right? Oh, and we go back to that thing. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that concept, and I love this concept, Danny, the reticular activating system, right? That part of our brain that literally it will hone in on what you're looking for. If you're looking for joy, if you're looking for happiness, if you're looking, whatever you're looking for, if you're looking for problems, if you're looking for pain, you will find it, right? And so I just think that that's incredibly powerful to remind ourselves of, every single day. And for me, yeah, it's the wisdom that I've had in my life is through the painful experiences as much as the positive experiences. Although I read that it's during actually inflection points in life that are the most painful where you get the most growth. And so we shouldn't be afraid of failing. And we shouldn't be, yes, it's horrible when you're in the messy middle of a life quake. And I've been there. I was, as I shared with you, I was there through the beginning part of 2025. But it's fascinating what happens when you get a coach, right? Or when you get trainers, or when you surround yourself with individuals who enable you to realize that, there's ways of pulling yourself out of certain funks in certain situations. And I think the final thing I'll say is that, you become like the five people you spend the most time with. You got to choose wisely, right? And I'm lucky. I'm surrounded by brilliant people like yourself, right? And other individuals who just bring out the best.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I'll slide you that $20 later for mentioning that. We've talked a little bit
Yeah.
about failure so far in this podcast episode, but let's flip the
Hmm.
script. Talk about success for a moment. When you think about your journey, what
Hmm.
is a time and accomplishment that you had that in the moment you didn't give yourself enough credit for, or you didn't fully appreciate in the moment? But now, where you are today, with hindsight, looking back, oh, that accomplishment was a huge part of my journey in becoming who I am today, or getting to where I am today, or just the development of Sara as a person. What's an accomplishment when you look back that in the past, when you experienced it, you didn't really fully embrace it or fully appreciate it? But now with hindsight, hindsight's 2020, you have a much greater appreciation for it.
Right. There's a few, and what I'll describe to you is just simply what I found and what I learned um, about myself. Is when I was working at Fortune 100 companies, so these are like what 100,000 employees at companies, usually top 10 brands, right, with a lot of market share. Okay. And what ends up happening in these companies is you end up having individuals that are your sustainers, right? And every company needs that because everybody can't be an innovator or like everything's going to be in flux all the time. But what I found is that the more successful the companies were that I worked at, the more conservative sometimes you would have in your leaders who were afraid of losing that market share or seeing their stock go down. And what I found was that in the toughest economic periods, I found a couple of things. Number one, I always tended to gravitate towards the innovation products, right? The ones that people weren't sure if they were going to be successful or not. Okay. And I tended also to gravitate towards doing innovative work, right? And the one thing that I learned is that my solutions or the strategies that I proposed were an ordinary solution to an extraordinary problem. That's the way you could categorize it. Okay. And I think what I found is that a few of the experiences of selling an idea is like one campaign that I ran, it was a promotional campaign to drive sales during the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. It was 2010, right? We put all of our money into this one campaign, and people were like, what are you going to do? If it fails, this is the end of your career. And I just remember that the trademark of all these campaigns that were like the biggest successes in my career was that there were so many naysayers, and I had to navigate that, and I had to really dig deep to push things through. Because when you are a strategist, right, the risk is you will become the director of PowerPoint. right? Because number one is selling in an idea. Number two is executing it. And number three, the proof is in, did it drive sales? Was the strategy successful? And I knew far too many people that were happy being director of PowerPoints. When people were like, that's a brilliant idea, we're not going to do it, right? So then there was very little risk for them, right? And so I think that's the biggest campaigns that I ran. One of them actually had a 30% chance of death for the consumer. Okay, I sent winners into the edge of space on a Russian MiG. The Russians were selling trips on Russian MiGs that would get you up to about 80,000 feet. Okay. And there was a 30% chance of death because the G forces would cause you to, like, literally to vomit and choke on your own vomit. Anyway, so, we took, can you imagine the indemnity contract? I mean, it was unreal. And it was, again, a top five brand, right, that I did this at. And I have to tell you, it was very difficult selling it through. But once I did, what I found is I had such a conviction what I was doing, regardless of how difficult. Like, I had some superiors that were like, this is going to fail and you're going to be responsible and you're going to ruin a brand. And, blah, blah. And I knew that I had such a conviction, a belief in what I was doing, that when I executed it, I had results that far exceeded anyone's expectations or what the target was. And I was then surrounded by people who were like, I knew all along it was going to be successful, and I was actually part of that idea with her. And I was okay with that. Right. But I knew that there was a little bit of bitterness in that experience. And I feel that, maturity for me and wisdom came in understanding that people you know, are not readily accepting of new ideas that are really so far outside their comfort zones that I either have to lead teams that will be driving innovation, or I have to be very uncomfortable being uncomfortable, if you will, comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And so for me, if you were to say to me, what was the benchmark? It was having the grit, right? And I think Coach Sumner put it perfectly when he said it's a blue collar work ethic married to indomitable will, right? You're showing up day in and day out, day in and day out, working on a specific strategy, selling it in, getting approval, taking, I think it was something like 20 countries was one campaign, and getting all the local teams like rallied around it to execute it successfully, and then praying, right? That you're driving the sales that the target that you had during horrible economic downturns, and being able to turn around and say, oh, wow, because of this one campaign that ran in 1 month, we made our sales projections for the year, right? It was just, anyway, what I found is if I didn't fall in love with that process, the difficulty of that process, being successful, once I crossed that finish line and was successful, it's so short lived, right? And I remember I got awards, industry awards and company awards, right? And while, yes, there was a lot of pride in getting those, there was also the, hey, I'm bandaging the scars from, just trying to push it through and getting it approved, and going through that hardship. That really, the learnings for me during that time period was fall in love with the process. And if you can't fall in love with the process, the success is just too short lived to make it worthwhile.
If you don't fall in love with the process, you're signing up for misery, because process is 99% of life, and the achievements and the accomplishments are this tiny little sliver in time. But one of the things that you said in there was that you had such conviction in the idea. And I think that ties back to confident in your uncertainty, because you weren't
Mhm.
certain it would work. There's no
Right.
ability to be 100% certain and say, look at this Excel spreadsheet that I made, and this shows that it's going to 100% certainty work. But you had the confidence and the conviction to push through the uncertainty anyway. And I think that ties beautifully into what we were talking about earlier.
Yes. And and that's the thing about marketing, is it's an abstract science. Okay. It's not mathematically deduced. It's creating something from nothing. It's not like engineering or accounting, if you will. And so, yeah, it's always a gamble. But again, if you have the belief, at least has always served me well. If my gut was saying, no, 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 you've read the research and the data. This looks like this would be what would resonate most with your target consumer. Um, no one else, especially in 2010, during, like I said, the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, no one in our marketing organization was stepping up to say, you know what, let me take this. Nobody. In fact, people were like, here, Sarah, you can have my budget. You take it. You can wear this, right? Because nobody believed in it. It was a trip to space, right? And yet it did what it had to do. And again, it took a team and whatnot. I just happened to be leading it, and it was an incredible source of pride. But from that, I learned that, and some of the stuff I did at Nokia, and what have you, I learned that I have to be comfortable being in a room in which people are laughing at you and be like, you can laugh, but I really, really believe in this, right? And getting that approval and then working on it is in making the work that you're doing on it passionate and being able to turn down the noise of naysayers and what have you. It took a lot of kind of character building to be able to achieve that. But again, like we said, if you're not falling in love with the process, um, then that brief moment of success, it's going to be short lived, and you're just not gonna you won't enjoy it as much as the process itself.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like we could keep talking for hours. The way I want to wrap this up is that people
Hmm.
watch or listen to this podcast in order to become better leaders, in order to learn some skills, become more self aware, whatever that is. So, what is one recommended action that you have for the viewers and listeners of this podcast if they want to become a better leader? What is one recommended action they can take today in order to grow their own leadership skills or make a better impact on the team around them?
Well, I think number one would be definitely, if you haven't already, you've got to do StrengthsFinder, right? Because if you don't know yourself and your strengths, then how do you recruit a team that will complement your strengths? You should never hire people that are exactly like you, because you will implode, right? And I know, for example, my strengths are definitely strategy, vision work, okay, and influencing and commanding and whatnot. And when you look at the four quadrants of StrengthsFinder, and that's why I have teams that are phenomenal at executing and phenomenal at the relationship side, right, of things. And I think what I would say also to anyone who says, I want to be a great leader, if you're not leading yourself and a great leader of yourself, you're not going to be a great leader of people. And so before even thinking, let's say we're talking to somebody who's really young. Okay, who's just setting out in their life and they're trying to discover what it is that they like or what have you. Or even when I say young, I mean 20s and 30s. Okay. What I would say to you is channel your energy into the things, the people, and pursuits that matter to you, that set your soul on fire. I remember I told my father, Dad, you got to save your fucks. You have to, only for the magical shit, right? And my father was like, okay, let me process what that means. I said, because you can't, like, if you care equally about everything and even the things that don't matter, then at the end of the day, nothing will matter, right? And I think, reawaken the obsession with being obsessed with things that matter. For me, that's my growth. And, relishing and unpacking, the pleasure of pursuit, right? The pursuit of something that you're doing, whatever that might be, even if it's like, hey, I'm working on an operating plan that's going to increase the operational efficiency of our company, or even the, hey, I'm terrified of AI, but if I'm not informed about what AI is, then I can't even have an opinion about it. So I really got to, dive into that. And for anybody who's listening who's like, well, I don't know that much about AI, let me tell you something, right? Think of those people during the mobile burst, right? Who were like, put that thing away, right? And they were the people that later said, okay, fine, I got a phone for my car in case of an emergency. And that's the only reason why I would need it. They fell so far behind. They couldn't understand why everybody was sitting around looking at their screen. Imagine what your life would be like if you said, I'm not going to do email. No, sir. I'm not about that. Or a PC in my home. I knew people like this, by the way, during the PC boom that were like, "Ah, why would you ever need that in your home? Where are those people now? And how far behind did they fall?" And I think the same thing is happening with AI. In order to be informed, you really need to just lean into it, learn as much as possible so that you can actually have an informed decision. I mean, that's what I mean about relishing and unpacking the pleasure of pursuit. And then at the end of the day, ask yourself, are you squeezing life dry and milking it to the bone? Because if you're not, right, then you need to get on with the powerful act of living.
The
That's it.
powerful act of living. I think that's the perfect place for us to wrap up. Sarah, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you,
here on the
Danny.
show.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and send it to someone you think might like the topics that we talked about today. Now go out there, take action in your business, and become the leader that your team needs you to be.